The day started like any other. I was in my office, buried under a mountain of paperwork, when a nagging thought crept into my mind. Something was off with Lisa. We had been married for almost 2 decades, and I could usually read her like an open book. Lately, though, her behavior had been different. She seemed distant, preoccupied, and there was a growing chasm between us that I couldn't ignore any longer. Lisa and I had been through a lot together, raising 2 kids, surviving financial hardships, and supporting each other through thick and thin. We always had a strong bond, or so I thought. But now I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. It all started a few months ago when I noticed that Lisa was spending more time on her phone. She would smile at messages, then quickly hide her screen when I walked into the room. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia. I didn't want to be the jealous husband who suspected his wife of infidelity without reason. But the signs kept piling up. One night, I decided to stay up late, pretending to work in my home office. Lisa had gone to bed early, or at least she said she did. As the clock ticked past midnight, I heard the faint sound of laughter coming from our bedroom. My heart sank. I crept up the stairs, my footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. I stood outside our bedroom door, straining to hear the conversation. It was Lisa, giggling like a schoolgirl. Her laughter was soft, intimate, the kind you share with someone special. I felt a lump in my throat, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her just yet. The next morning I tried to act normal, but inside I was a mess. I couldn't focus at work, my thoughts constantly drifting back to Lisa and her secret conversations. I decided to do something I never thought I would. I installed a small voice-activated recorder in her car. It felt wrong, invasive, but I needed to know the truth. Was I being paranoid? Or was there something more sinister at play? Days turned into weeks, and my anxiety grew with each passing day. I would listen to the recordings late at night, my heart pounding as I heard snippets of her conversations. Most of it was mundane, talking to friends or running errands, but there were moments that raised red flags. Mentions of meeting someone, laughter that seemed too intimate, and worst of all, silence when she would pause to listen to the other person. I couldn't hear their voice, but it was clear she was involved in something she didn't want me to know about. One evening, Lisa came home later than usual. She had a glow about her, a smile that hadn't been directed at me in a long time. I tried to suppress my jealousy and asked her how her day was. She told me she had been out with some friends from work, but there was something in her eyes that made me doubt her words. I needed more concrete evidence before confronting her. I decided to follow her the next time she went out. It was a Friday night when she told me she had a late meeting. My gut told me otherwise. I tailed her car, keeping a safe distance, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. She drove to a part of town we rarely visited. I parked a few blocks away and watched as she entered a small, cozy restaurant. Through the window I saw her meet a man. They hugged, and my heart shattered into a million pieces. I drove back home, the weight of my suspicions now a heavy reality. The image of Lisa with another man was burned into my mind. I needed to know who he was, what he meant to her, and how long this had been going on. But most of all, I needed to confront Lisa and hear her side of the story. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Lisa's steady breathing beside me. How had we come to this? When did we drift apart so far that she sought comfort in the arms of another man? I replayed the past few months in my mind, searching for signs, for moments when I could have changed the course of our relationship. But it was too late for regrets. The next morning, I made a decision. I would confront Lisa. I would demand the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Our marriage deserved honesty, and I needed to know if there was any chance of saving it, or if it was time to let go. Confronting Lisa required a level of courage I hadn't yet mustered. The moment was imminent, but I wasn't ready to face it unarmed. I needed to know everything before I accused her of the worst betrayal. The night after I saw her with that man, I found myself standing in our garage, staring at her car. The voice-activated recorder I had planted was now my lifeline to the truth. My hands trembled as I retrieved it and took it back to my office, my heart racing with a mix of dread and anticipation. I plugged in the recorder and hit play. The first few minutes were silent. Then came the sound of Lisa's voice. She was on the phone, speaking in a hushed tone. I leaned in closer, my breath caught in my throat. "I can't wait to see you again," she said softly. "Last night was amazing." The pain of her words was a physical blow. I fast-forwarded through the recording, hoping to catch something more concrete. The next segment was a conversation between Lisa and a man. His voice was deep, familiar, but I couldn't place it. They spoke about mundane things at first, then the conversation shifted. "Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything?" the man asked. "No," Lisa replied. "Mark's been so busy with work, he barely notices. Besides, he's always been trusting." Trusting. That word stung more than any other. I had trusted Lisa implicitly, never doubting her loyalty or love. Now it seemed that trust had been misplaced. The recordings provided enough evidence to confirm my worst fears, but I needed more. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The following week was excruciating. I acted normal around Lisa, forcing smiles and casual conversation while inside. I was a storm of emotions. I watched her closely, noting every text she sent, every time she left the house. My paranoia was consuming me, but I couldn't stop. The more I uncovered, the deeper the betrayal felt. One evening, Lisa mentioned she had to work late again. My heart sank, but I nodded and told her to take care. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. This time she drove to a hotel on the outskirts of town. I parked discreetly and watched as she met the same man from the restaurant. They embraced, and she handed him a key card. They entered the hotel together, and I felt my world crumble. I needed to get inside, to confront her with the undeniable truth, but barging in would only create a scene. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures. They were grainy and distant, but they were enough to confirm what I already knew. Lisa was having an affair, and it was time to confront her. I drove back home, my mind racing with how to approach the confrontation. I replayed the conversations and scenes in my head, each one more painful than the last. I decided to wait for her at home, to face her in our own space where we had built our life together. It felt fitting, in a tragic way, to have the confrontation in the place where our love had grown. When Lisa walked through the door later that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the photos spread out in front of me. She paused in the doorway, her smile fading as she saw my expression. "Mark, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Sit down, Lisa," I said, my tone flat and cold. She obeyed, her eyes darting to the photos. Her face paled and she reached out to touch them. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "It doesn't matter," I replied. "What matters is that you've been lying to me." "Who is he, Lisa? How long has this been going on?" Tears welled up in her eyes and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "Mark, I can explain." "Explain what?" I interrupted. "Explain how you betrayed me? How you shattered our life together for some fling. Tell me, Lisa, how do you explain that?" she sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "It's not what you think. I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened. I felt so lonely, so disconnected. And he was there, offering me comfort." "Comfort?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Comfort is what you seek from your husband, not some stranger. How could you do this to us?" Her tears flowed freely now, but I couldn't find any sympathy. The betrayal was too raw, too fresh. "I'm sorry, Mark. I know I messed up, but I still love you. Can't we fix this? Can't we find a way back to each other?" I stared at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, now a stranger to me. The pain and anger coursed through me, but deep down, there was still a flicker of love, a tiny part of me that wanted to believe we could salvage our marriage. "I don't know, Lisa," I said finally. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we had. But right now, I need time. Time to process this, to figure out what I want. You need to give me that." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, Mark. I promise." As she stood to leave, I felt a pang of sadness, but it was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Lisa had broken my trust, and it would take a long time to heal, if healing was even possible. The days that followed were a blur of raw emotions. I vacillated between anger, sadness, and a hollow numbness that threatened to consume me. I had always prided myself on being a rational, level-headed person, but this situation had shattered that image. My thoughts were a tangled mess, and I couldn't focus on anything. Work became a distant concern. My mind was consumed with the betrayal that had unfolded in my own home. Lisa had moved into the guest room, a silent acknowledgement of the chasm that had opened between us. We barely spoke, and when we did, the conversations were strained and superficial. I couldn't bring myself to look at her without feeling a surge of pain and resentment. Every moment was a reminder of what had been lost. One evening I decided it was time to have a real conversation. The air was thick with unresolved tension, and we couldn't continue living in this purgatory. I needed answers, and more importantly, I needed to understand if there was any hope for our future. I found Lisa in the guest room, sitting on the bed with her head in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red from crying. "Lisa, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. She nodded silently, and I took a seat on the chair opposite her. The room felt small and suffocating, but I pushed the feeling aside. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, breaking the silence. She hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "About a year," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. A year. The weight of that revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. An entire year of lies and deceit. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Why, Lisa? Why did you do this?" Tears welled up in her eyes again. "I felt so lonely, Mark. You were always away, working late, traveling. I felt like I was living alone, even when you were here. And then he came along, and he made me feel seen, appreciated. I know it's no excuse, but that's how it started." Her words stung, but there was a part of me that understood. I had been so focused on providing for our family, on building a future, that I had neglected the present. I had taken Lisa for granted, assuming she would always be there, waiting. But understanding her reasons didn't erase the betrayal or the pain it caused. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely concealing the bitterness. "Do I know him?" She nodded, her face contorted with guilt. "Yes, it's John. John from the office. John." The name was like a dagger to my heart. He was a colleague, someone I had considered a friend. The betrayal felt even deeper now, knowing it was someone within our circle. "How could you do this with him?" I demanded, my voice rising. "He was our friend." "I know," she cried. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But it happened, and I can't change that. I am so sorry, Mark." I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. The room felt too small, too confining. I paced back and forth, trying to process the flood of emotions. "Do you love him?" I asked, the question burning in my throat. She shook her head vehemently. "No, I don't. It was never about love. It was about filling a void, about feeling something when I felt numb inside. I never stopped loving you, Mark." Her words were a bitter consolation. She might not have loved him, but she had still chosen him over our marriage. The pain was still raw, and I couldn't see past it. "I need time, Lisa," I said finally. "I need time to figure out if I can ever trust you again, if we can ever rebuild what we've lost." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll give you all the time you need. Just know that I'm willing to do anything to make this right." I left the room, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on me. I felt exhausted, emotionally drained. The future seemed uncertain, a murky path filled with more questions than answers. But at least now, the truth was out in the open. The first step towards any kind of resolution was honesty, and we had finally taken that step. The days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere in the house remained tense. Lisa made efforts to bridge the gap, small gestures of kindness that I struggled to accept. She cooked my favorite meals, left me notes of apology and love, and tried to engage in conversations, but my heart was still heavy with the burden of betrayal. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a thought occurred to me. Confronting John might provide some clarity, some sense of closure. I needed to hear his side of the story, to understand why he had betrayed me. The next day I made up my mind to visit him. I found John at his office, sitting at his desk, oblivious to the storm about to hit. When he saw me, his face turned pale, and he stood up quickly. "Mark, I can explain," he stammered. "Explain what?" I shot back, my voice cold and controlled. "Explain how you slept with my wife for an entire year, how you betrayed our friendship." He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Mark. I never meant for it to go this far. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. A mistake, I echoed bitterly. That's all you can say? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know what I did was wrong. I don't know what else to say. His words offered no comfort, no justification. I had hoped for some kind of revelation, some understanding of his motives, but all I felt was a deep, seething anger. Stay away from my family, John. If I ever see you near Lisa or my kids again, I won't be responsible for what I do. He nodded, his expression one of defeat. You have my word, Mark. I'll stay away. I turned and walked out of his office, the confrontation leaving me with more questions than answers. But at least I had made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate any further betrayal. It was a small victory in a war that was far from over. Back at home, Lisa was waiting for me. She looked at me with hopeful eyes, but I couldn't offer her any solace. I spoke to John, I said, my voice flat. She nodded, tears welling up again. I understand if you need more time, Mark. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so long, now a stranger in so many ways. The road to healing would be long and arduous, and I didn't know if we would ever reach the end together. But for now, we had taken the first steps, and that, at least, was something. The days after my confrontations with Lisa and John were a maelstrom of anger and frustration. Every time I looked at Lisa, the image of her with John replayed in my mind. I couldn't escape it. The betrayal was a wound that wouldn't heal, and I found myself yearning for some form of retribution. It wasn't enough to just know the truth. I needed to reclaim my sense of control, my dignity. I needed to take action. One evening, as I sat alone in my office, an idea began to form. It was risky, potentially destructive, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the only way to regain my power. I decided to gather more evidence of their affair enough to publicly expose them if necessary. If Lisa and John wanted to play with fire, I would ensure they got burned. I started by hiring a private investigator. It felt clandestine, almost like something out of a thriller novel, but I was beyond caring about propriety. I provided him with all the information I had gathered via DJ photos, recordings, and details of their meetings. His job was to dig deeper, to find indisputable proof that would leave no room for doubt. As the investigator went to work, I began plotting my next move. I reached out to an old friend from college, Tim, who was now a prominent attorney. He specialized in family law and had seen his fair share of messy divorces. When I explained my situation, he didn't hesitate to offer his help. Mark, you've got a solid case, Tim assured me. We can file for divorce on grounds of infidelity. With the evidence you're collecting, you'll have a strong position in court. But are you sure this is what you want? I need to protect myself, Tim, I replied. If she wants to destroy our marriage, she won't get to walk away unscathed. Tim nodded, understanding the resolve in my voice. All right, let's make sure you're covered. We'll draft the papers and get everything ready. Once your investigator provides the final pieces of evidence, we'll proceed. The weeks that followed were a blur of clandestine meetings and hushed conversations. The investigator provided a steady stream of updates, each one more damning than the last. Photos of Lisa and John together, records of their hotel stays, and even incriminating messages they had exchanged. It was all falling into place, a dark tapestry of betrayal and deceit. One night, as I sat in my office reviewing the latest batch of evidence, Lisa knocked on the door. She looked hesitant, as if sensing the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. Mark, can we talk? She asked, her voice tentative. I looked up from the papers, my expression unreadable. Sure. What do you want to talk about? She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. I know things have been incredibly difficult between us. I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to apologize for. But I want you to know that I'm committed to making things right. I want to rebuild our marriage, to find a way back to each other. Her words were sincere, but they felt hollow to me. The evidence of her betrayal was scattered across my desk, a stark reminder of the chasm that now separated us. Lisa, I appreciate that you're willing to try. But right now, I need space. I need to figure out if this is something I can ever move past. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I understand. Just know that I'm here and I won't give up on us. As she left the room, I felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, A part of me still loved her. But the hurt was too deep, the betrayal too fresh. I turned back to the evidence, my resolve hardening. This wasn't just about our marriage anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my sense of self. The day I filed for divorce was a day I would never forget. Tim and I sat in his office, the paperwork spread out before us. Each signature felt like a final nail in the coffin of our marriage. When it was done, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I was closing a chapter of my life, but the story wasn't over yet. That evening, I gathered my thoughts and summoned the courage to tell Lisa. She was in the living room, reading a book, when I approached her. Her eyes met mine, and she knew something significant was about to happen. "Lisa, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady. "I've filed for divorce." The color drained from her face, and she set the book aside. "Mark, no. Please, let's talk about this. We can work through it." "I've made my decision," I replied, my tone firm. "I've given this a lot of thought, and I believe it's the best course of action for both of us." She broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I know I hurt you, Mark, but I love you. Can't we at least try to fix this?" "Love isn't enough, Lisa," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and you broke that. I'm not sure it can ever be rebuilt." The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and legal proceedings. Lisa moved out, staying with her sister while we navigated the initial stages of the divorce. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching someone else's life unravel. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty. But amidst the chaos, there was a small glimmer of hope. I was taking control of my life again, making decisions that were best for me. It was a long and painful road, but I was determined to walk it. As the weeks turned into months, the anger and resentment began to fade. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, and I was slowly finding a new rhythm. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I had neglected, and started focusing on my own well-being. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, I received a call from Tim. "Mark, we've reached a settlement. The divorce will be finalized soon." I took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. "Thanks, Tim. I appreciate everything you've done. You'll get through this, Mark." "You're stronger than you think," he said, his voice reassuring. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of closure. The journey was far from over, but I was finally moving forward. I had faced the betrayal, sought my revenge, and now it was time to rebuild. It was time to find a new beginning. The divorce proceedings were in full swing, and each step felt like an emotional battlefield. As I navigated the legal maze, the weight of the past year bore down on me. But with each passing day, I felt a small measure of the control I had lost returning. The settlement meetings were particularly grueling, filled with tense negotiations and stark reminders of the life Lisa and I had built together and were now tearing apart. Tim proved to be a formidable ally. His expertise and unyielding support made the process less daunting. "We're almost there, Mark," he would say after each meeting, his reassuring presence a constant in the chaos. Lisa's lawyer was a smooth-talking negotiator, skilled at turning every point in her favor. But Tim was equally relentless. We had enough evidence of the affair to leverage a fair settlement, ensuring that I wouldn't lose everything in the fallout. Still, the process was draining, and the emotional toll was immense. One particular day stands out in my memory. It was a cold, gray morning, and we were gathered in a conference room for what we hoped would be the final settlement meeting. Lisa sat across from me, her face a mixture of regret and determination. Her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Greg, was already laying out their terms. "We believe Mrs. Thompson is entitled to a significant portion of the marital assets," Greg began, his voice measured. "Given the length of the marriage and her contributions as a homemaker and mother, it's only fair." Tim countered smoothly, presenting our evidence of the affair and the impact it had on the marriage. "While we acknowledge Mrs. Thompson's role, we must also consider the breach of trust and the emotional distress caused by her actions." The back and forth continued for hours, each side making concessions and standing firm on certain points. The tension in the room was palpable. Lisa avoided my gaze for most of the meeting, and when our eyes did meet, there was a flicker of something vague, perhaps regret or sorrow. but it was too late for those emotions to change the outcome. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached an agreement. Lisa would receive a fair share of the assets, but I retained the house and a significant portion of my savings. More importantly, the agreement stipulated that any future interactions regarding our children would be conducted through a mediator. It was a necessary step to ensure our paths would cross as little as possible. As we signed the final papers, a sense of relief washed over me. It was bittersweet, knowing that this was the end of a significant chapter in my life. Lisa lingered for a moment after the lawyers left the room, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I'm truly sorry, Mark," she said softly. "I never wanted it to end this way." I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. The hurt was still too fresh, the wounds too raw. "Goodbye, Lisa," I said finally, turning away to leave the room. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of the future. The house felt emptier than ever, but it was a blank slate, a place to start anew. I poured myself a drink and sat on the porch, watching the sunset. It was a symbolic end to a turbulent chapter, and I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope for what lay ahead. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and adjustments. I began redecorating the house, removing traces of the life Lisa and I had shared. It was cathartic, a way to reclaim my space and make it my own. I donated old furniture, painted the walls, and even bought new artwork to adorn the bare spaces. I also started attending a support group for people going through divorces. It was awkward at first, sharing my story with strangers, but it quickly became a source of comfort. Hearing others' experiences and realizing I wasn't alone in my pain helped me heal. The group's facilitator, a kind woman named Susan, was instrumental in guiding us through our emotions. "Divorce is like a death," she said during one meeting. "You're grieving the loss of a relationship, a future you had envisioned. It's okay to feel sad, angry, or even relieved. Give yourself permission to feel and heal." Her words resonated deeply with me. I allowed myself to mourn the end of my marriage, to acknowledge the good times and the dreams that would never be realized. But I also began to look forward, to imagine a life beyond the pain. One evening as I was leaving the support group, I ran into an old friend, Karen. We had lost touch over the years, but she had recently moved back to town. We decided to grab a coffee and catch up. It was refreshing to talk about something other than the divorce, to reconnect with someone who had known me before the turmoil. As we chatted, I realized how much I had isolated myself during the marriage. Reconnecting with old friends and making new ones became a priority. I joined a hiking club, started taking photography classes, and even tried my hand at cooking. Each new activity was a step towards rebuilding my life, a life that was entirely my own. The finalization of the divorce was a quiet affair. Tim called me one afternoon to confirm that the judge had approved the settlement. "It's official, Mark. You're divorced." The words hung in the air for a moment. "Thank you, Tim, for everything. Take care of yourself, Mark. This is the start of a new chapter. Make it a good one." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The legal battle was over, but the emotional journey was just beginning. I stood on the porch, looking out at the world with a sense of cautious optimism. The past year had been a trial by fire, but I had emerged stronger, more self-aware. It was time to embrace the future, to build a new life filled with possibility and hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it head-on, armed with the lessons of the past and the resilience I had discovered within myself. With the divorce behind me, the path ahead seemed less daunting. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of freedom. My days were no longer clouded by the shadows of betrayal and deceit. Instead, they were filled with opportunities for renewal and growth. It was a chance to rediscover who I was and to build a future on my own terms. I threw myself into activities that I had long neglected. Photography, once a casual hobby, became a passionate pursuit. I spent weekends exploring the city with my camera, capturing moments of beauty that reminded me of the world's inherent goodness. Each click of the shutter was a step toward reclaiming my sense of wonder. One Saturday morning, I joined a local hiking group for a trek in the nearby hills. The fresh air and physical exertion were invigorating, a stark contrast to the sedentary life I had led during the darker days of my marriage. As we climbed higher, the city fell away, replaced by the serenity of nature. The group was a mix of people from all walks of life, each with their own stories of triumph and loss. Sharing the trail with them, I felt a sense of camaraderie and connection that had been missing for so long. Karen, my old friend from school, became a regular presence in my life. We met often for coffee or dinner, and our conversations ranged from the nostalgic to the deeply personal. She had gone through her own share of heartaches and triumphs, and her resilience was inspiring. One evening, over a glass of wine, she looked at me thoughtfully. "Mark, I've seen you grow so much these past few months," she said. "I know it's been hard, but you've come out stronger. What's next for you?" Her question lingered in my mind long after our dinner ended. What was next? The possibilities seemed endless, yet daunting. But for the first time, I felt ready to face them. One of the first steps in my new journey was redecorating the house. I wanted to create a space that reflected my new beginning, free from the ghosts of the past. I painted the walls bright colors, filled the rooms with artwork that inspired me, and arranged the furniture to create a sense of openness and light. It was therapeutic, transforming the house from a reminder of what was lost into a canvas for what could be. I also reconnected with my sister, whom I hadn't spoken to much during my marriage. Jenny had always been a source of support, even when I had distanced myself. We spent hours catching up on each other's lives, and I found comfort in her unwavering presence. "Mom and Dad would be proud of you," she said one evening as we sat on her porch, sipping tea. "You've been through hell and back, but you're still standing. That takes strength." Her words were a balm to my soul. Family had always been important to me, and rebuilding those bonds was a crucial part of my healing process. Work, too, became a refuge. I threw myself into new projects, finding satisfaction in the challenges they presented. My colleagues noticed the change in me, and their support was invaluable. Paul, my friend and co-worker, was particularly encouraging. "You're like a new man, Mark," he said one afternoon as we grabbed lunch. "It's great to see you so energized. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." As the weeks turned into months, the routines of my new life began to take shape. I joined a gym, started cooking classes, and even volunteered at a local shelter. Each activity was a reminder that life was still rich with experiences and connections waiting to be made. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Karen, holding a bottle of wine and a mischievous smile. "Thought you might need some company," she said, stepping inside. We spent the evening cooking together, laughing and sharing stories. It felt easy, natural, like a glimpse of what life could be. As the night drew to a close, Karen looked at me, her eyes soft and sincere. "You know, Mark, you're doing great. I hope you see that." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Thanks, Karen. You've been a big part of that." The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. The past was a part of me, but it didn't define me. I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. A few weeks later, I decided to take a solo trip to the mountains. It was something I had always wanted to do, but had never found the time for. The crisp air, the majestic peaks, and the solitude provided a perfect backdrop for reflection and renewal. As I stood at the summit, looking out over the vast landscape, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was my life, my journey. The twists and turns had brought me to this point, and I was stronger for it. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, and let out a long, contented sigh. Back in the city, I continued to build on the foundation I had created. I met new people, forged deeper connections with old friends, and pursued my passions with renewed vigor. Life was far from perfect, but it was real, and it was mine. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with a message from Karen. "How about dinner tomorrow? My treat." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had become familiar. "Sounds perfect," I replied. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a sense of fulfillment. The past was behind me, and the future was a canvas waiting to be painted. With each new day, I was writing a story of resilience, hope, and new beginnings, and I was ready for whatever came next. The journey through betrayal and heartbreak had been arduous, but it led to a place of strength and self-discovery. The process of healing was ongoing, but each step forward was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As I continued to embrace new experiences and build meaningful connections, I realized that the end of one chapter was merely the beginning of another. Life, with all its challenges and triumphs, was a journey worth taking, and I was ready to face it head on, with hope in my heart and a newfound sense of purpose.